Joining us now is New York Times bestselling author and Fox Sports college football writer Bruce Feldman. Bruce recently wrote the book, The QB, The Making of Modern Quarterbacks, on every major bookstore shelf right now. Great read. Bruce, welcome to BYU Sports Nation.
Good to be on with you guys. Thanks for having me.
All right, your colleague Stuart Mandel warned you about the BYU fan base last week on your podcast, The Audible. Are you ready for this?
I think so. I think so.
Let's start with the subject matter of that podcast and the once again ramped up Big 12 expansion talks, basically for the 73rd time in 74 days or something like that. Again, you recently hosted it with Stuart Mandel and George Schroeder from the USA Today, talking about the top 4 teams that would be fit for Big 12 expansion. You had BYU as your 4th best fit for the conference. Why did you have the Cougars there behind the likes of UCF and Memphis and Cincinnati?
A couple of things. So Florida is an area where a lot of schools have wanted to get into expanding. A lot of schools recruit in the state of Florida. That's a big pitch. It gets them closer to West Virginia, which is an outlier right now geographically. So I think that UCF, facilities and resources-wise, it's a huge school. It's a huge school enrollment-wise, facilities-wise is good. It's had success on the field in the last few years under George O'Leary, too. So it's not to say it's a perfect case. As Stu pointed out, they're not very good in basketball. That's the biggest drawback. When you look at Cincinnati has had some success under Tommy Tuberville. It's very close to West Virginia. Again, geographic partner makes some sense. They've been very good in basketball. So that made some sense. Memphis, which is really good in basketball over the years, is also geographically makes more sense. Now, football-wise, they have struggled, but last year, they did have some success under Justin Fuente. They've committed to ramping up facilities, which is a positive. I had BYU 4th for a couple of separate reasons here. Now, geographically, it's a trickier fit because it's going much further west. Not playing games on Sundays, which affects other sports, is a challenge, I think. Football-wise, I think they're better than anybody because of the history and because what Bronco Mendenhall's done. And I think they're a consistently legit top 20 team, but there's so many other factors in there that I think make it a little more challenging. The other one, too, is if you look at some of the places where the schools in those areas recruit, now they're going to live off of Texas because that's really in the footprint there, but Florida is a much more desirable place for a lot of these other schools to try and recruit, whether it's not just West Virginia, but Iowa State, Kansas. They're still gonna try to get in there because Florida is known as such a speed state, and it produces per capita pretty much more high-level football than anywhere.
Bruce, what's the trigger that would cause the Big 12 to expand?
I think the concerns is that when there's a kind of a shift coming, whether it's TV contracts coming up or towards the end of the bowl, the playoff system getting kind of renegotiated, they're going to be worried that the Big 12 will again get picked apart, which was a concern before. And I think you have a lot of, starting with David Boren, the president of OU, there's a little bit of an inferiority feeling complex right now that, hey, we're at 10, we're the smallest of the Power 5, and we're a little vulnerable.
When you look at the future of college football, and let's just say in 5 years, Bruce, given that you have been an insider for a number of years and are currently doing that and writing for Fox College Sports, where do you see college football in terms of Power 5 conferences in 5 years?
It's a good question. I'm not, it's the one thing that I think is tricky with this realignment stuff is you hear, I don't even want to say it's spin, but you hear a lot of people saying one thing, and I'm talking about not reporters, I'm talking about administrators at schools or powerful boosters. They'll say one thing, and then all of a sudden, the rug will get pulled out from under them. And I think it's not necessarily because these people lie, but I think some of the power brokers, it's a very cutthroat business and it is a business of what works for somebody may not work for somebody else. I mean, a lot of people thought that the ACC was going to be on shaky ground, and it managed to come out of a lot of this unscathed, and it ended up poaching other leagues. So I think that's where it's really hard to predict. My gut feeling is that the Big 12 will expand. Now, will they expand to 12? Will they expand, to 14? I doubt it. My guess is they'll go to 12. I don't know who else would grow. I don't see the Big 10. They added Rutgers and added Maryland. I don't see the Big 10 reaching for other schools because they're a little more traditional in how they operate. I don't know if the Pac-12 would grow much more out of, who else is out there for them. BYU in that regard, because obviously Utah is already out there. Colorado is not that far away. You look at some of the other places, but it's, the West is so spread out. I don't think there's a lot of other places that make sense. I mean, Boise State's football program is terrific. Their fan base is really passionate. But you look, there's a lot of other things that factor into this. And one of the big things is, and I think we can probably talk more about this, is the eyeballs. You hear this term footprint, but the eyeballs of who comes in and how many people are gonna matter for your next TV contract. I mean, for the University of Houston, which a lot of their fans have said, how come you didn't include us? Well, I like Tom Herman. I think that they've made some good strides in the last 5 years. They're changed ADs, but they already have that quotient in the TV contract. It's not like the University of Houston is going to bring much more than University of Texas /TCU /Texas Tech /Baylor is already committed to that area. So it's just not, necessarily bringing a chip you don't have. And I think, that's something that people need to keep in mind. And I think until all this realignment talk in the last, half dozen years, a lot of people outside of, the power brokers themselves never really heard the term footprint as it related to college athletics.
I have a quick question. Can the Big 12, can they survive if they don't expand?
That's the question. I mean, that is something that I think concerns a lot of people there. I mean, who knows? It was like, well, was Texas and Oklahoma going to leave? Because, as good as Kansas basketball is, one thing we have had hammered home in the last, half dozen years is that it's football that drives the boat. It's not basketball. So Kansas by itself, sorry, Bill Self, but it would be reeling from that if the football powerhouse schools decided to go someplace else. I think Bob Bowlesby's a strong leader, and I think he's helped. I think Dan Beebe, who was the old Big 12 commissioner, probably didn't get enough credit. He became kind of a punchline to a lot of people, but I think he did a better job of pretty messy situation given the climate that was going on then.
Fox Sports college football analyst Bruce Feldman with us on BYU Sports Nation. You can follow him on Twitter at Bruce Feldman CFB. Are we on a crash course for 16-team super conferences at any point?
I had thought that, because then you'd have 4, somebody else would go away or get diminished. But I don't know. I feel confident that we're on more of a course for an 8-team playoff eventually,
okay,
as opposed to 4 teams. But so much is up in the air. I feel like we're all kind of guessing at that because we don't know. This is a weird game of poker that some of these guys, whether it's Jim Delany or Bob Bowlesby or some of the more politically charged school presidents, are kind of looking at each other, and I don't think a lot of these guys trust each other after what's happened in the last 10 years.
Now, speaking of Jim Delany, he is now quickly approaching a new TV deal in the Big Ten Conference, which I'm sure is going to be ridiculously large and will have an impact on what happens here. Now, if Jim Delany pulls the trigger and goes to 16 teams, do you think that would be the trigger that would launch another shift in college football?
It would. I mean, if they were to do that, I don't know which of the 4 teams you're talking about adding. Is he going to say, hey, we got Iowa, we're going to add Iowa State? I'm not sure that's, a sexy enough move. The big fish out there for a lot of years had been Notre Dame, but Notre Dame's, even though in football they're an independent, they're still, other sports are kind of tied into the ACC. So I look at it and say, well, Pittsburgh is now in the ACC. I don't know where they would get, add a couple of other teams to go to 16. I'm not sure which the couple others they would bring on make the most sense for them to make that move and split up the pie a little more.
Yeah, and I only ask that because of what David Boren, the Oklahoma president, said, and that is there might be more money if there are more teams in the conference, specifically in the Big 12's case. Who knows? I mean, I don't know
if they're the right teams, but I don't know if there's not a school out there that's another Texas or even another another Florida State. Florida State couldn't get out 2 or 3 years ago, or how many years ago, some of their boosters started to really chafe about their situation. So I don't see another one out there that's like that. I mean, I don't see Clemson up and going to the Big 12 or, something like that is desirable for a lot of reasons and would bring a lot more money to change their equation.
Let's switch gears here now, Bruce, and talk about something that you have spent a number of years and a lot of time studying, and that is the quarterback position, especially in the modern era. When you look at Taysom Hill as a quarterback at BYU, what do you see in him as his greatest strength and perhaps his greatest flaw?
His greatest strength is, I think, he is incredibly tough. I ran into Bronco Mendenhall at the conference meetings in Arizona probably a month ago, and I knew he was a terrific athlete. He was a guy who was on my Heisman top 5 before he got injured, but I didn't know he was the fastest guy on the team. I mean, BYU has some athletes there. It's like, I didn't know he was – I knew he was fast. I didn't realize he was that fast. And, because I'd seen him play. I'd seen a bunch of the BYU games on TV last year and was just kind of so wowed by him. I think there's a comparison a lot of people are going to make, which is to Tim Tebow, because he's a tough guy who runs it really well. It's not like he's just a get outside the tackles guy. He'll run over some people. And I think, but I think he's a better athlete than Tim Tebow. I think he has a gear maybe that, Tim Tebow would run. They'd run the power with him, and basically he was the short yardage guy. I mean, Taysom Hill does run away from some guys. Now, whether he runs away from some guys as a 4.55 guy or a 4.39 guy, I mean, he's still, a more explosive athlete. I think the challenges for him going forward, and I think, his greatest weakness, I think, is that toughness, is because he's a guy you're going to take on a lot of people, and I don't care whether you're, Tim Tebow, Cam Newton, whoever, you're still talking about eventually taking on 300-pound guys, and a lot of them. And when you throw a football, if your shoulders or your forearms or your hands are banged up, it's going to take effect. You're not a tailback. So I think that's one of the challenges there, is keeping that guy healthy, because he is such a weapon. I mean, I'd like to point out, since, and I think I pointed out on this podcast, when we did our best players in college football draft about 3 weeks ago, and we had to take 2 quarterbacks on each team, Taysom Hill was my second pick as a quarterback, ahead of a lot of guys who, people are talking about as Heisman candidates, because I just think he's just a difference maker. And I also think, by the way, if I needed to, he'd be a great short yardage back. He'd be a great linebacker. I think he's one of those rare guys who probably could be an all-conference player at like 5 different positions, and you can't say that about hardly any other quarterbacks.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is he might have a career in the NFL not playing quarterback, quite honestly, because of the athletic skill set that he delivers. By the way, you stating that you picked him, you just made like 1 million friends on Twitter across BYU Sports Nation.
Hey, look, I've seen the games, and I know coaches who've faced him. I remember talking to one of the guys on the old Houston staff, and he was like, he is a massive problem to play against, because, and this is somebody else who talked about how physical the secondary that BYU had was too, but he was just like, unless you're out on the field with him, you do not know how good of an athlete he is or how tough he is. And again, these are coaches who face guys at the highest level all over the place. It's just, here's a guy who, some people don't see because he's not in the SEC or he's not in the Pac-12 or whatever. But you talk to guys who've been on the field with him, and they come away raving. And to the point where we had David Shaw, the Stanford coach, at our studio early last season, and I knew that Taysom Hill had signed there, and so I asked a little of the background, just because it was a while ago. I want to say it's like he might have been the class of 2009, maybe. So, but he. I think he is one of the more interesting figures in college football this year, especially to see how he does in his recovery.
Bruce Feldman, New York Times bestselling author, Fox Sports College Football insider and writer, and the author of recently released The QB, The Making of Modern Quarterbacks, joining us on BYU Sports Nation. Bruce, it's a great read. I've taken a look at it. What's the easiest way to find that book?
Easiest way is just to go to Amazon.com and search for the QB, or go to BruceFeldman.com, and you can order it either through Amazon or a bunch of different ways, or get it as it's on audiobook or however ebook, however anybody wants to get it. It's pretty easy. Just search for my name and the QB.
Bruce, great to talk to you, and we hope that Taysom Hill wows you some more in the approaching 2015 season.
Hey, if he's healthy, I'm sure he will. So,
all right.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks, Bruce.
Bye.
Good stuff from the Fox Sports College Football insider and New York Times bestseller, Bruce Feldman.